Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and you're looking at what seems to be 110 planets. Yes, planets. Not dwarf planets, not moons, planets. Today we're going to be talking about a new proposition and a new definition of what a planet might be. And today we're going to discuss if it actually makes sense to have 110 planets in our solar system. Anyway, welcome to What the Math. Pluto! What have you done, Pluto? What have you done? A few years ago, well, I guess more than 10 years ago now, you used to be a planet. Then you became a dwarf planet. All thanks to Dr. Brown, Mike Brown, who was the scientist responsible for basically redefining the term planet when Pluto lost its status. But many people were upset. I mean, I was upset. I kind of liked Pluto being a planet. My memories of 9 classical planets are still kind of strong, and I definitely would like to remember Pluto as something more than dwarf planet. And many scientists felt the same, and so they actually proposed a new definition, a more extreme definition of a planet that would turn many of the objects in our solar system into a planet. And it's actually kind of interesting. And the proposed definition is actually very simple. What is a planet? Well, a planet is a substellar mass body that has never undergone a nuclear fusion. Basically, it was never a star or a star-like object, and has enough gravitation to be round due to hydrostatic equilibrium, regardless of orbital parameters. Okay, what's the nutshell of this definition? Basically, a planet is something round that is not a star, independent of where it orbits and how it orbits. And I think that's a pretty simple definition, something that we can easily remember, and something that obviously will keep all of the classical planets as planets, make Pluto a planet as well. But of course the problem is that it will also introduce something like 101 other objects into that definition. Now, is that a problem? Not really. Well, let's actually talk about this in a little bit more detail. But first of all, let's actually create a system where you can kind of see which objects would be defined as a planet by this new definition. We're going to create a system, maybe right here, yeah, solar system with everything that is not a moon over a certain size. And we're now going to basically go to the planets that we know have moons and add moons to them. So Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus will all receive their moons. We also possibly need to do the same for Pluto. And here we go. So I think all of the objects I wanted to include are now here. Now, many of these objects that will be defined as a planet are actually currently defined as moons, or in other words, satellites. One of them is very close to us. One of them is very close to home. One of them is actually our moon. And yeah, of course, moon is called the moon because it is the moon, right? It's the satellite of Earth. But here's the thing. Our moon is so unique and so different from all of the other moons in our solar system that today many scientists think that Moon and Earth are actually dual planets. Their masses are so close together in comparison to actual moons, like for example, moons of Jupiter, that many scientists believe that our moon does not meet the definition of a moon. If you look at Saturn, for example, its moons are so tiny in comparison. Its moons, its satellites are nothing as dramatic as our own moon. And so defining it as a planet would make a little bit more sense. But of course, that creates a lot of new problems for a lot of textbooks that we've used in elementary and middle school. Anyway, the other reason why the proposed definition makes more sense is because by current definition, everything past Neptune, everything in the Kuiper's belt already sort of is disqualified from being a planet. The definition basically states that to be a planet, you not only have to be round, but you also have to kick off everything from your vicinity, from your region, and be the only object in that region that is round. That's why Pluto lost the definition, because there's so many other dwarf planets, like for example Huya and Varuna, that are in this Kuiper belt region. But the thing is, this is a huge region. You can't just disqualify Pluto from being a planet just because it's somewhere here. By that same reasoning, Planet 9 that Mike Brown is looking for is also not a planet because it's also here somewhere. So that's not a planet, right? So yeah. And because some of these objects are so far away from each other, they would never even be able to interact gravitationally, so it would not make sense that they're called dwarf planets now. And so a lot of scientists think that having planets defined with orbital parameters is not really fair and doesn't really make sense. So because, if you have a dual planet, for example, if there is like, let's just say we'll go to Earth for a second, and if we actually try to define this system of Moon Earth as a dual planet, it would never be able to fit that definition because none of these objects cleared the orbit, so neither one of them would be a planet. And instead, this new definition focuses on the intrinsic properties of the object, specifically on its composition and shape. So if it's not a star or star-like object, and if it's round, it becomes a planet. And so this would be a planet. This here would be a satellite planet. So our moon would be called a satellite planet. And then objects like, for example, Europa, which is the satellite of Jupiter, would be satellite planets of Jupiter. And many scientists today already call Europa and Titan and other moons of Saturn and Jupiter as planets already. As a matter of fact, there's at least 40 scientific papers where Europa or Titan are referred to as planets. And actually, to be honest, I too sometimes call them planets in one of my previous videos, normally by accident, but sometimes on purpose, because they do seem, act, and feel planetary, especially Titan. I mean, seriously, look at this object. It has atmosphere, it has liquid cycles, it has oceans and lakes and stuff, and rivers. How is that not a planet? Definitely a planet, right? Anyway. And actually, some of the reasoning behind this new definition totally makes sense. For example, the scientists that claim that we should have these defined as planets say that, well, if you define them as planetary objects, it will actually make astronomy a lot more positive. Right now, dwarf planets don't really excite us too much. I mean, what's a dwarf planet? Why would we even go there? But if you say that Pluto and Varuna and Ixion and Titan are all planets, it definitely excites people a lot more. It promotes the idea of astronomy and exploring space and is more engaging to public. So, words and names are actually quite important. Dwarf planet doesn't really sound as exciting and doesn't really give us that feeling anymore. And so they actually also propose that we create various sort of types of planets. Like, for example, these would be gas planets and satellite planets. Everything on the inside, including Mercury and Venus, which would be right there. And Earth and Mars would be rocky planets. Then we have ice planets, which would be Uranus and Neptune, possibly Planet 9 if we ever find it. And some other objects would be smaller rocky planets and so on and so forth. So there will be basically different types of planets, including things like double planet, which of course would be Pluto and its current moon Charon, because their size is so similar to each other and they're relatively close to each other. And I don't really know what happened to Charon. I may have to actually re-add it because it flew away somewhere else. But they orbit around each other relatively close. Like, they actually are within visible distance and their barycenter is outside. And so this, to me, definitely looks like a dual planet. And so these would be qualified as dual planets or double planets. And of course, this is such a better definition for the moons as well, because many moons are so unique and so different that it would not really make sense to call everything a moon. Like, how is that a moon compared to our moon or compared to moons of Jupiter? It's a very different object. It's round, but its orbit is very different from the moons of Jupiter, for example. And of course, this is not a perfect definition. Like, for example, we know that Enceladus, which is one of the current satellites of Saturn, is technically around the same mass as the object in the asteroid belt known as Vesta. Now, we've known about Vesta for like over 100 years. It's a very old object. And if I were to compare them, in terms of size, they're actually relatively similar. But the thing about Vesta is that it's not really spherical, it's not round. Enceladus is round, but Vesta is not. Vesta looks like a very large asteroid because it's mostly rocky. Enceladus looks round because it's, for the most part, is actually icy. It's made up out of ice. And so even though Enceladus and Vesta do have the same size, they don't have the same shape. So this might actually disqualify Vesta from being a new planet. But maybe not. Maybe we can redefine the roundness as well. And anyway, let's actually go into the chart here. And I'm going to show you these newly defined planets, starting of course with Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune and Uranus, Earth, Venus, Mars, Mercury, and then we're going into the variety of moons and satellites of various planets, or classical planets that is. And now we're going into what today is known as a dwarf planet, but would be known as a planet if this definition passes. And interestingly, many of these, as a matter of fact, almost like a half of these, still don't really have names. They only have numerical designations. But if we define them as planets, their names would come pretty quickly. I think people would be very excited to name these objects and would probably give them some really, really cool and unique names. Like, for example, I think one of them should be named Anton, because why not, right? Okay, just kidding. Anyway, but many of these you may never even heard of. Like, for example, Ixion is one of the objects I've talked about in one of the previous videos, but not many people know about this one. But if it was a planet, I think people would probably be excited to know more about it, even though it is by itself a very exciting object, very similar to Pluto, by the way. And anyway, so that's all I wanted to talk about in this video, and let's actually maybe keep going through these 110 newly possibly defined planets that might actually be an actual definition sometime in the future, which I would totally support. And you know what? In the comments below, let me know what you think. Should we actually have 110 planets? Should scientists take this seriously and really propose this as an official definition? And do you think it would actually make our solar system a little bit more exciting? Because I personally don't really like the term dwarf planets. I don't like that we don't have Pluto as a planet anymore, and I think many people would agree with me. And anyway, subscribe if you still haven't, and share this video with someone who enjoys watching science videos and wants to learn their video games. Come back tomorrow to learn something else, educational, and thank you for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Space out. And as always, bye-bye. And there they are, 110 of them in all of their glory. Welcome to the newly defined planetary system of the Sun.